Namaskar, bonsoir, good evening. Today, the 2nd of October, is the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, which we in India observe as Gandhi Jayanti and the world as the UN International Day of Non-Violence. To this day, we at the Embassy of India in Paris welcome you to this webinar on the timeless relevance of Gandhi's ideals. Mahatma Gandhi needs no introduction. A lawyer, an anti-colonial, a social reformer, philosopher. Many words describe his life, each as powerful as the other. However, in every role, the ideas he propounded remained constant. So today, it is no surprise that non-violence as an act of courage, truth as a tool of movement, and the ideas of success and anonymous Mahatma. Last year, as part of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, we witnessed nations across the world pay tribute to the inspirational figure. They included unveiling of statues, special exhibitions, commemorative events, and stamps, including one by France. Compared to this date last year, we inhabit a very different world today. With the COVID-19 pandemic virulent across geographies, economies, and demographics, it is perhaps an opportune time to discuss the relevance of Gandhi's ideas. For this, we have a Menon panel today, Ambassador of India to France, Shri Javed Ashraf, author-journalist Rajani Bakshi, author-journalist Monsieur François Gauthier, entrepreneur Mr. Ramesh Menon, author Marie-France Letranche. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our audience listening and watching us live from India, France, and across the world. A warm welcome to everyone. I would like to begin with India's ambassador to France, Shri Javed Ashraf. A career diplomat, Ambassador Ashraf joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1991. Prior to taking up his assignment in Paris, Ambassador Ashraf was India's High Commissioner to Singapore. With this, I request the ambassador to kindly give his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Priya, and namaskar, and good evening to everyone here in France and elsewhere. Thank you also to this eminent panel that has come here with us today. One, of course, will join us a little later from California. But again, thank you very much for being with us and being prepared to share your experiences with and your ideas on Mahatma Gandhi. Now, it is an extraordinary feature of our times that over 70 years after his death and over 150 years after his birth, for the past 2 years, the entire world has been celebrating the life, the message, and the mission of Mahatma Gandhi. And if you think of all the ideas that competed for the world in the 20th century, the one that really endures even today is the ideas and the ideals represented by Mahatma Gandhi. And it is no surprise that it is so. One, of course, is the fact that he led India to freedom, the largest colony of the mightiest power in the world. But it isn't just that, it is also because of the means he used and once again demonstrated that moral strength can be stronger than political or physical power. In the methods he used and in the manner in which he inspired millions of Indians to join him in this freedom struggle, he set a trend that continues to be practiced across the world. And we've seen it practiced by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We've seen that with Nelson Mandela. We've seen that in Lech Walesa in Poland and many others that come immediately to our minds. Even today, that remains non-violence and cooperative movement. A non-cooperation movement remains the most potent force of seeking justice in the world. But it was also the fact that he wasn't just speaking about political freedom, but he was also speaking about emancipation and liberation. Emancipation of those who were historically excluded or oppressed, and liberation of human beings from their prejudices that led them to paths which cause a lot of problems in the world. And really, he did not differentiate between one form of freedom and another form of freedom. And so, therefore, it remains timeless and universal. So that is why he spoke about as much about dignity, opportunity, equality, and justice as he spoke about political freedom. And that remains relevant even today. When he spoke of harmony, he didn't speak of homogeneity or dominance of one and the silence of the other, but he spoke about respect across diversity, acceptance across differences. And this is why he was able to bring together such a diverse country behind a common purpose without in any way seeking to brush one aside or the other. But also, today, when we think of the importance of climate change, we are reminded of his life and what he said about environment. Now, he may have been the first to speak about really conservation, but it wasn't just about conservation of environment. It sprang from what I think was a holistic worldview of life, of non-violence. So it was also a holistic approach to nature, in which he wanted to avoid the practice of violence against nature, but also the frugality of living. At a time when consumption has become so rampant and our exploitation of the limited resources of nature has become so huge, I think we need to look at his life and think in terms of an alternative. And that fulfillment is not necessarily only achieved through pursuit of continuous consumption. And I think that message is particularly important because when we deal with environment, nature, and climate change, it isn't just about technology like clean energy. It's also about change of lifestyle because clean energy, solar, and wind will have their own set of problems. It's our attitude to it. And finally, today, when we deal with so many different challenges of economy, we need to remember his own ideas also have become extremely relevant. Perhaps at a time when the whole world was caught up in this rapid industrialization process and mass industrialization, large industrialization, his ideas seem somewhat quaint and archaic. But today, I think people are revisiting because he spoke about decentralization. He spoke, more important, about social compact between industry and society, that business was essentially in a role of trusteeship for society. And this is something which has come back to discussions. He spoke about liberating enterprise from the shackles of government and also linking sustainability with business practices, again, something that has become so relevant today. But I think what makes him, with all of these ideas, perhaps particularly relevant because he wasn't constrained by ideologies or isms. And that is, he, in a sense, had spoke really or appealed to the fundamental human values and ideals, free from those constraints of institutionalized dogmas. And that is why I think he appeals to everyone, and his ideas and his ideals are applicable to every situation. But even more, perhaps also, is that he lived his message, he lived his mission. And it wasn't someone who was born a saint. He started as an ordinary, as a professional, and then through his life experiences, he graduated into from a man to a Mahatma, from a human, as we say, to a Mahatma. But he did not wish to be deified. He did not wish to be elevated to a status where people thought he was above them. But and which is why I think that so many people who came in touch with him were inspired enough to try and live his ideals also, because he was so grounded to the earth. So I think today, when we look at the world, when we look at the tensions, divisions, disparities, when we look at the uncertainties, and when even more, when we look at the way we are dealing with our differences, the level to which we have taken our differences to disputes, to conflicts, and the lack of ability to accept other points of views, amplified ironically by social media, that we remember that the basic message that he propounded and then he lived by become even more relevant today. The big question for all of us today really is, how do we popularize his message, his mission even more? How do we make it part of curriculum? How do we make our youth actually read him, think about his life, and understand how he went about achieving his objectives? Because that is perhaps the biggest contribution we can make to his ideals, and not just simply celebrate the fact that we had a Mahatma in our midst. And with France, there's a special attachment, and I'll conclude with that because he came here in 1931. It was also the Romain Rolland who introduced him to France. But as some people say, the idea of declaring October 2 as the International Day of Nonviolence by the United Nations General Assembly, which, by the way, was adopted unanimously and co-sponsored by 140 countries, actually came out of a classroom in Paris by a Hindi teacher. I mean, we need to really verify that. But if that were true, it truly brings another very strong link between two countries that share and civilization that share some very common ideals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Indeed, a global apostle of peace, Mahatma Gandhi's ageless wisdom can help humanity move forward. And with this, I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Ms. Rajani Bakshi. An author, a journalist, and an activist, Ms. Bakshi is a former Gandhi Peace Fellow at the Gateway House. She is also a member of the Executive Committee of the Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti under the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. She is the author of Bazaar's Conversations and Freedom and Babu Kuti, which was adapted into a successful Bollywood film. Ms. Bakshi, how would you encapsulate Mahatma Gandhi's notions on modernity and, as Ambassador said, contemporize his ideas?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Greetings to His Excellency, the Ambassador of India, and such a delight to hear you capture the legacy in such a succinct manner. I was thinking about Gandhiji's critique of modernity because I could see the Eiffel Tower drawing behind you. And, Gandhiji shares this with Tolstoy, that he's not impressed by the Eiffel Tower. He thinks it's a bauble. It indicates, in a sense, how easily we are distracted by the glitter of technology. And I think really that is the crux of the matter today. Now, I want to clarify, since you got me on this track, I do want to say something about nonviolence, but I think I can use some of my 10 minutes to just explain what I mean, because I think the time has come to clarify that when you admire Gandhiji's perspective on the material side of life, it doesn't mean that you are advocating everybody return to charkha and khadi. The point there is not to take the charkha literally, but to understand what it signifies. It is actually today the most futuristic technology possible. It requires no, it can be run on very simple low wattage solar energy. I'm assuming that, we are already at the stage where we don't want somebody to sit and literally do it. And it is a symbol. It is a symbol of how you can, if you so design it, make technology work for people rather than the other way around. Now we have extensive documentation on how the kind of cotton that was grown in India over the last 200 years was deliberately imposed. That a particular kind of cotton was deliberately imposed because that's what the machines could handle. And in the process, we lost a vast variety of tree cottons. But that's not the topic here today. I'm just using that as an illustration to say that all Gandhiji was saying is that let the machine work for us, not the other way around. And, that's very much true of this very medium on which we are all meeting. Now, it is magic. It is magical that we are sitting in different continents and even in very far distant locations in the same country. And here we are. So that is magical, and there's no, way of minimizing, in a sense, the seductive power of that kind of magic. But is this technology going to work for us, or are we going to become its slaves? I've only recently seen this new documentary, The Social Dilemma, and it is showing you it's the creators of the social media technology are documented in that film, telling us how it has unleashed, well, basically a kind of a psychological pandemic. So that's all I meant to clarify, that with everything, we have to ask, am I being empowered in a way that expands my sense of peace within? If I am being empowered, yes, okay, I may be empowered that, I can fly hither and thither as much as I like. But if that much activity is making me a restless and therefore depressive person, is that progress? So that's one dimension of asking. And I think it is in this spirit that I just want to add a point, because His Excellency brought in the issue of Gandhiji being way ahead of his time on the issue of environment, that he was saying in the 40s that one planet will not be enough if everybody in the world decides to live like the West. And we all know that Western consumption patterns were a fraction of what they became after the Second World War. And I think he was, as he didn't have data. He was not saying this on the basis of, any statistics of the kind that we have today on a website like Earth Overshoot Day. He was saying it again from this his basic commitment to Swaraj. That is, what is it that empowers? Swa is the self, Raj is rule. But what is it that gives you greater rule over yourself? As opposed to handing over that power over yourself to either technology or to other kinds of distractions, which will be very pleasing in the immediate moment, but they may leave you actually kind of, if not disempowered, but in some way dependent and enslaved. So I think this was why he was so keen that we in India not join what he called the Pagal Daud. Literally translated, it means mad race. Now, the question of nonviolence, because that's actually what I promised to talk about, is very closely related to this. And I am not here referring to nonviolence in the limited sense of it being a weapon or a method of political protest. That's a very important dimension. And I want to quickly say that it is important to put on the record that in the last 70 years, there has been an enormous variety, not just numbers, but variety of different kinds of ways in which those methods of nonviolent political action have been grown, they have been innovated, and there's tons of research on it. I think what matters for us much more today is, what does it mean in our everyday life? Are we able to experience nonviolence as a higher freedom? And this is connected with what I said earlier, that it was, unfortunately, Gandhiji's ideas on the material side of life came to be associated with asceticism, with excessive kind of self-denial. But I don't think that was, or at any rate, that's not what is worthwhile for us today. Because really what is viable is that which an ordinary average person can do. And it has never been required that the average ordinary person become an ascetic. That's not feasible. That's not natural. But there is a huge spectrum between asceticism and shop till you drop, or any kind of material existence where you are what you wear because of the brand name or of the label, of the cost of it, etc. So it is in this sense that even non-violence, I'm suggesting, is more precious when we are able to link it to our everyday life as a higher form of freedom. And here I'm going to draw in Hannah Arendette, who was a very, very important German-born philosopher, political philosopher. She escaped from the Holocaust. and did most of her work in America later on. She actually is one of the most important people who developed the core insights that Gandhiji had brought to the political arena. And she makes a very important point. She puts it beautifully. She says it's not power that flows from the barrel of a gun, it's only obedience. And if you are just being compelled, if you are able to compel somebody to do what you want because you're going to otherwise shoot them, that's not power. Power is what people do because they are getting a sense of agency. Power is that when this man says that if you come to the beach on a certain day and pick up a pinch of salt, you are moving our society, our nation towards freedom. And not just freedom from a foreign ruler, but freedom from oppressive economic systems. That is power. And so it is in that sense that I am suggesting that we can see above all that nonviolence is truly a higher form of freedom, and it is freedom from fear. It is freedom from envy. A large part of the power distortion that happens in our lives is due to envy, because we place ourselves voluntarily or involuntarily on some hierarchy, and then we are forever, worried about our place on that totem pole. It is freedom from feeling that we have to be judged by others. Because I think if there is a single kind of epochal learning that I have at least taken from Gandhiji's life, it is that there is no discipline if it's not self-discipline. And there's no discovery if it's not self-discovery. Meaning, don't let somebody else, based on some other, some borrowed frame, locate your life in the larger picture. It is for you. True freedom lies in finding your own way of locating yourself in that larger picture, and doing so in ways that maybe at least brings some joy and light to the lives and the pictures of the others around you. I think I'll stop here. Maybe we'll have time later for more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And welcome to Madame Marie-France Tranche, who's just joined us as well from California. Moving on, today, as Ms. Bakshi spoke, as the world grapples not just with the COVID-19 pandemic and the psychological pandemic that Ms. Bakshi mentioned, but also there is an increase in the increasing divisions. And these are leading to challenges that are truly enormous and diverse. And to discuss Gandhiji's take on this, I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Monsieur François Gauthier. An author and journalist, Monsieur Gauthier has been the South Asia correspondent for the French national daily Le Figaro, and has also been a columnist with the Indian national dailies, The Indian Express and Pioneer. He has authored several books, including A History of India as It Happened and Not as It Was Written. Monsieur Gauthier, over to you.
As a journalist, I find that when you go abroad, apart from the Buddha, of course, there is one icon, universal icon, that people know in France, America, in Brazil, everywhere you go. It is the Mahatma Gandhi. I found out that there are more than 120 countries who have printed stamps with the Mahatma Gandhi's image, photography. And then more than 80 countries have built statues dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi. So he's an icon that Barack Obama, a man that we all admire, said has inspired him all his life. And indeed, Mahatma Gandhi has inspired many, many, many people, both ordinary as well as famous people. Of course, in France, the ambassador mentioned Romain Rolland, but there are so many others, André Malraux, and recently Jacques Attali, written a huge biography of the Mahatma Gandhi. The relevance of Mahatma Gandhi today seems to me more about racism, because racism is something that is bothering all of us, including me. The violence that erupted against racism, and also the fact that there is a genuine grievance from many countries in the world that victims of racism. Now, as you all know, the Mahatma Gandhi fought all his life against racism. He started in South Africa, fighting for the rights of minorities, especially Indians, against the apartheid government, the South African government. It was a difficult fight. He himself was a victim of racism when he was evicted from a first-class compartment in a train and even from a hotel. So his real fight before the fight for India's independence started with racism. And when he came to India, he fought for the Dalits, for the untouchables, who were victims more now than they are, more then than they are now, of another kind of racism, the caste racism. So it's very, very relevant today. And I find that journalists are, when they covered the anti-racism riots, particularly in the US, but also they happened in France, forgot to mention the Mahatma Gandhi. He talked a lot also about the Bhagavad Gita, which is a book of universal value, and which says that God may be born at different times, using different names, using different scriptures, which gives a universal value to God. That there is no monopoly on the divine, that the divine can manifest at different times. And indeed, this is something that, as a lover of India, as someone who has lived a long time in India, married to an Indian, I find that is unique in India, is that people in India have this understanding, this tolerance of everybody, which is the opposite of racism. Because you might be white, I'm a white man living in India, but because of the Mahatma Gandhi's message, whether I go to Kerala, I started my career as a journalist, going to Kerala, covering something called Kararipayat, which is a very ancient martial art which went eastwards toward China and Japan. I found that people there, though I was ignorant, I was a white man, I was from a different religion, I'm brought up in Catholicism, they accepted me, which is something very unique. So the message, the relevance of the Mahatma Gandhi today, more than non-violence, because non-violence is something which is not universally accepted. Countries use violence, that is violence, psychological violence, but more than non-violence is against racism. And I think that Indians, or lovers of India like me, should use more the Mahatma Gandhi's quotes against racism, to give a kind of tempering down, of cooling down the tempers which exist. Even now, when I'm in Paris, I just landed from Delhi 3 days ago, and I find that it's such a hot subject, it's such a violent subject. So the words of Mahatma Gandhi are very relevant today, and we should all use them against racism. This is what I wanted to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Monsieur. And indeed, now I would say that shifting gears from social equality, as you spoke about, to economic opportunity, Mahatma Gandhi envisaged khadi and the handloom to evolve as the sun of the solar system, that is, the village economy. And someone working relentlessly to make Mahatma's vision a reality, we have our next speaker, Mr. Ramesh Menon of the Save the Loo initiative. An industry veteran, he has over 2 decades of experience across media, entertainment, events, and the fashion industry. Save the Loo was set up as a non-profit in August 2018, soon after the devastating Kerala floods, with an aim to restore and revive the affected handlooms and khadi units, as well as a long-term perspective to reform the sector. With this, Mr. Menon, how do you envisage achieving Gandhiji's idea of the village economy?
Good evening, Shri Javed, esteemed co-panelists on this webinar. Discussion. It's a privilege to share some of my thoughts with Gandhi, contemporary to fashion. Gandhi's personal search for sartorial integrity is a remarkable story without parallel in the political history of the world. To him, clothing was not merely a means of cultural evolution. It was essentially part of his inner quest for truth. Talking about my connectivity to the ideology and philosophy was through different aspects from the speakers. Connects Raji from the word passion. So most part of Gandhian thought processes and the global creativity to him was looked upon as a half-naked fakir, which went along as a large moniker with him. Gandhi's life and times has been well chronicled, his action and his editorial choices, reflecting his action and the messages he wanted to convey at different points in his life. From being a dandy to becoming the Gandhi is an highly inspirational, often matter of many presentations and great debates. Not only his personal styling and attire did he convey the philosophy, but his personal experiences also led him to wear, shed clothing to wearly, strongly send his message across. If it was his four-piece suits and well-dressed persona to be accepted early part of his life, or to discard them to fight equality, which later became very symbolic. I can very vividly remember a young 18-year-old contestant at a pageant, Sushmita Sen at a Miss India by finale question, was asked by India's textile historian, on being asked, what do you know about the textile heritage of this country and how old it has been? Startled, not finding much words, she rhymed very well and said, it all began with Gandhi's khadi. That very exactly is kind of the connectivity of fashion industry here and with khadi's emergence in the last 75, 80 years. Every one of us encountered at a time when we search for deeper meanings in life. I was stuck in the devastating floods of August 2018 in Kerala that displaced close to about 1,000 artisan families in khadi and handloom. Coming from the industry and having understanding the plight, I had a choice to make: to stay back and work and find ways and mechanisms to bring solutions, or simply go back to the lives we live in cities. I chose latter, stayed back, and 15 odd years that I've been part of the fashion industry, I have associated with a large amount of young design talent and have been delving deeper into the world of handmade and understanding the larger context of India's source of hand-skilled artisan craftsmen. There is a huge new awakening of new young Indian design talent, which is looking at these Gandhian principles and values of looking at the village economy, preserving the craftsmanship that is prevalent in India's economy, India's vast heritage, and trying to kind of build it up in such a way that it can be taken to a global platform. In terms of asking the relevance of Gandhi, it's not more about the real issue is whether we have the courage and strength and mind to follow his footsteps, whether we're prepared to live our lives, what he preached, and most importantly, practiced. In which context the fashion world has larger relevance today when you look at the craftsmanship available in this country. If you look at it, slow fashion is something which is getting traction across the world. In terms of Indian craftsmanship, there are about 3.5 million people who are still connected to handloom in this country, which has come down in the last 20 years from about 6.5 million practicing handloom. Yet, we produce 95% of handmade textiles in the world. How do we preserve them? How do we look back at protecting this entire supply chain and creating a village economy, which Gandhiji so much well resonated with? And so that is something which, as a journey, when we were looking at it, is how do you get an artisan in most part of India, even 3.5 million I spoke about, today barely make about less than 50 euros a month.
Mr. Menon, sorry to interrupt you. Could you please increase the volume? We are able to hear you, but many of the participants are not able to hear you.
Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
We could. We just want to know from the participants if they could.
Is it clear now?
I can hear. Yes, I think they can hear you now. Yes, please go ahead. Sorry. Thank you.
So in the context purpose of fashion work that we're looking at is to aim to produce sustainable luxury involving maximum participation and talk about craft-based village economy, wherein we do not displace the craft from the people, craftspeople from the surroundings and dwellings. Slow fashion, as I said, is much more talked about in today's world. It also means participation. I think in this century, we need to look at fashion in a completely new perspective, because fashion can lead the society to a new and a better world. The century of the idea of fashion needs to be redefined. It should be created not just for consumption, but also should be focused more on participation. And that's where exactly what Mahatma Gandhi's preachings and what something he said 100 years ago stays relevant today. He spoke about thinking of the poorest man or the weakest person in the society to think of bringing change. Or if he speaks about the soul of India lies in its villages, it's all far more relevant today that how do you kind of create that workforce, which is 70% of India, which lives in villages, how do you retain them within their ecosphere, try and create a modern lexicon in fashion. Work which specifically which we did is to multiple Khadi institutes that lost everything that they had. Bringing them back was a huge challenge, and we looked at various mechanisms by which we not only tell the stories of these artisans to a modern world, we also take the craftsmanship to a larger global platform. And many of these endeavors has been kind of, for the past 2 years, we've been trying to kind of bring it back in certain forms. So that stays the story of in terms of the craft sector that we have been working with, whether it's handloom and khadi. And we look at Gandhian ideology in terms of how he looked at the village economy, how he professed the ideas of creating something which, in the context of rural-based and economically viable production and consumption systems, or whether he talked about his dream village, which he felt was self-efficient, with his inhabitants living in harmony with nature. How does people who are well equipped with their craft skill sets can be retained to the ecosystems within the villages? So these has been the larger context that we have been looking at it. It's not only about the consumption factor, but fashion has a much larger relevance with Gandhian principles when we look at it, be it at the entire supply chain level, where we can research it, all the hand skills sector in India, which is parallelly and much competition with any other part of the world, because we have that kind of resources back in our country. How do we can connect and link it that to a global fashion world? The best or the largest Indian international labels within this last 70 or 80 years, we haven't seen much progression, economical structure, or kind of creating something which is a valuable supply chain where they get well paid, or the sustained economic system has been sustained. So this is the amount of work that we are trying to do, is kind of a build and bring in a new focus on the Gandhian principles and see where we can take the existing status of where the industry is and create a link between the rural artisans and the global fashion industry. I can emphasize and conclude with Gandhiji and highly relevant in the 21st century. Beyond objective is not to build the islands of prosperity, the ocean of poverty, raise the level of standard of life. Can you hear me?
I could not catch the last part. Now, yes, we can. Yes.
Yeah. I was looking at saying, concluding by saying the objective should not be build the islands of prosperity in the oceans of poverty, but to raise the level of standard of life and combat poverty with Gandhian thinking. And India has a large resource of human skilled craftsmen across the country, and that has much more relevance in today's world. Gandhian principles stand far more relevant than ever post-COVID and post-pandemic situation that we are living in, is to empower these village artisans and create a village economy which is self-sustained And India is perhaps one of the fewest countries in the world where every 50-100 kilometers, we have indigenous ecosystem of craft flourishing with whatever resources were available in that belt, which over the decades has been not been prospering far too much for various reasons. Khadi in the last 5 or 6 years has found a new voice with a new regime, the large of Gandhian philosophy. So that's
Thank you, Mr. Menon. And as you spoke about it, yes, it is clear that to decouple Gandhiji's political success from his philosophical contributions would be perhaps naive. It was the integrity of these ideas that made him truly a global figure. And to discuss his message and relevance further, I would now like to turn to our last speaker, Madame Marie-France Letranche, who has, as mentioned by the ambassador, is joining us from California today. Good morning to you, ma'am. And an author and an academic with an abiding interest in Indian culture, language, and philosophy, Madame Letranche received her doctorate on Mahatma Gandhi at Sorbonne. She's also the author of a book that traces the influence of Gandhi in France from 1919. Madame Letranche, based on your research, how would you contemporize Gandhiji's message in the real world today?
Very happy to join you today to celebrate Gandhiji's birthday, and I thank His Excellency for inviting me. I have been thinking about the relevance of Gandhi in the day today, and first of all, I'd like to start with when Gandhiji was not well known, about 100 years ago, when he was beginning his nonviolent movement in South Africa. The first person who recognized the importance of his movement was Tolstoy. And they started having a correspondence. And in 1910, Tolstoy wrote a letter to Gandhiji and told him that his activity in South Africa was very important, and not only for the Christian people, but for the whole humanity. And I wanted to mention that because he was the first one to recognize the importance of Gandhiji very early. Then, as the ambassador mentioned, of course, Romain Rolland had a major role in France and Europe because when he published his book, Mahatma Gandhi, in 1924, he made Gandhiji very popular in France and Europe. And after that, of course, many other leaders, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and in France, one of his disciples, Lanza del Vasto, tried also to create an ashram and follow the ideas of Gandhiji. But I asked myself when you asked me to talk about the relevance of his message, I thought I should talk about first the essence of his message. And because to be able to determine how we can apply his principles, we have to understand the essence of Gandhiji's message. And the first thing I wanted to mention is that Gandhiji's philosophy is based on an ancient Sanskrit sutra, which is Ahimsa Paramo Dharma. And that means Ahimsa is the ultimate Dharma. That is the highest Dharma. And for Gandhiji, that meant that we have to follow, each person has to follow an inner spiritual discipline. And I wanted to mention that because it's often forgotten, because a lot of nonviolent movements become political and forget the spiritual aspect of Gandhiji's message, which is fundamental and essential. And I wanted to mention that also because Gandhiji said that Ahimsa has to be followed in thought, in speech, and action. And he even said that Satyagraha is pledged to nonviolence, and that means that you have to follow it in speech, deed, and action. And without that, you cannot have a mass movement. So one of the big question is how to apply Gandhiji's message, which is a personal discipline, to a very large scale. And as we know, Gandhiji nonviolent movement was one of the biggest ever in history, and he was able, with the strength of his soul and his leadership, to lead India to fight against the British rule, which was not an easy task. And he was able to melt the heart of many British people. Of course, we know that it was not successful in some ways, but his example and his symbol have been very strong in spite of that. So now, the second point I want to talk about is the problematic between violence and non-violence. Because in our contemporary world, I think there are times when we need to use violence and times when we need to use non-violence. And for example, if a wild beast is attacking women and children, I need to ask myself, what is my moral duty? Should I let them killed, or should I try to protect them? Because ahimsa means to create the least harm. So I think that it's very important when we talk about the relevance of Gandhi to always understand that the goal is to harm the least, and also to fight against injustice. And if fighting against injustice sometimes mean to use violence against evil and create less harm, I think that that's a question we need to ask ourselves. The other question I ask myself is, today, especially today, we see that the world is now torn by religious conflicts, which are based on fanaticism and bigotry. And I think that is one, the message of Gandhi is very relevant in that aspect, because Gandhiji was able to go beyond any religion in his message. He was able to reach all the faiths, had read himself the Quran, the Gospels, and his message, he had been able to bring his message at a universal level. He had embraced many traditions, and he always said that there is only one God, and that we should find this oneness. So I think that the message of Gandhiji is very important to unite religion. The other place where I think that his message is very relevant is also to see that our modern civilization is based on power and possession. And that is something that Gandhiji was very well aware of, and he knew where it could lead to. And we see now that, for example, that power, that pursuit of power has led to the nuclear weapon, which symbolizes the absurdity of this materialistic search. So Gandhiji, when after Hiroshima, a journalist asked Gandhiji, what do you think of the atom bomb? And Gandhiji said, I think it is a diabolical use of science. And the journalist said to him, do you think then that nonviolence is useless? And Gandhiji said, no, I don't think it's useless because nonviolence is the only thing which cannot be destroyed. And I think Gandhiji answered that because ahimsa is not just a political weapon, is also, as he said, and as even Tolstoy said, it is the law of love. And I think that is also very important to mention that. So it is, I think that ahimsa today can be called inner yoga, opposed to the yoga, to the hatha yoga, which is widely used in the West. So I think ahimsa is an inner yoga and can be practiced by anybody and any religion to practice that self-inner discipline. So to conclude, the main thing I want to say is that Gandhiji had called his philosophy an evolutionary revolution. And I think that's a very important concept because he has given us a path. And I think we need all to try to progress in that path. The second, and then to finish, I want to say that when Richard Attenborough made a movie on Gandhiji, he went to see Pandit Nehru to ask him advice. And Pandit Nehru told him, you can do anything, but please do not make a saint out of Gandhiji. And Gandhiji himself didn't claim perfection. And his life, as we all know, is a series of experiments with truth. So I think that his message to us is to keep trying to do these experiments with truth and to try by our personal inner yoga to follow his message.
Thank you, Madam, and thank you to all the speakers. While this webinar was ongoing, we have received questions from the audience. I would request that, given the constraint of time, all the speakers please stick to about 2 minutes to respond to them. I will just address it to the respective speaker to whom it has been asked. The first one is to the ambassador. Sir, the question is, there is a lot of influence of Gandhi when it comes to government policies. But according to you, does Gandhi find similar relevance in the private sector, and how?
I think in many ways, probably he finds more relevance outside government than in the government. I mean, yes, there are a number of policies which supposedly take inspiration from Mahatma's teachings and his life. But I think you just had an example of someone, Save the Room, Mr. Menon, who is a great example of someone who's actually devoting his life to, in real terms, practicing the ideals of Gandhi. And I've come across hundreds of institutions in the private sector. Remember also during the freedom struggle, there were many in the big industry in India which actually tried to support the ideals of Mahatma Gandhi and practice what he preached. I can give you an example on how these things can make a big difference. I was listening to the inspiring story of Save the Loom, and we set up when I was in Singapore, a Kala Sangam, which was essentially meant to bring Indian craftspersons to Singapore to demonstrate their art, craft, and to sell whatever they could. And we were paying for everything from airfare to staying there and plus per diem, so that there were no risks associated, lodging, boarding, food, etc. And I can tell you the impact it had is just enormous, because people realize the kind of skills that go into that kind of work is far beyond anything that a factory can produce. and was sometimes a lesson in organic chemistry also when you see the work they do. And I think in preserving it, what the private sector and what Save the Loom is doing is not just creating employment, but they are saving a priceless, irreplaceable heritage of our country, which is across the entire nation. So this is something which I feel is happening, but the second and important part of this is what everyone here has spoken about, which is the essence of the message. And that essence of the message is, if you translate it to the private sector or non-government sector, is also the recognition of those values in the practice of their business. Ironically, I would say it is the import of modern management practices or business practices, which in some senses changes. And I say this as a graduate of one of those institutes, in Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, where we have imbibed a very Anglo-Saxon way of doing business. But I think a lot of people are realizing that traditional wisdom and what Mahatma Gandhi has practiced. So I would go on to say that perhaps I see more examples of it outside the government than perhaps in the government.
Thank you, sir. And the next question is from Ms. Rajani Bakshi. Ma'am, you spoke of technology and power. The question that has been asked is, in the digital age, the perpetrator is invisible for most of the crimes, which can range from blackmailing to cyber warfare. How do you contemporize Gandhi in that context?
A difficult question. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
That's a difficult question. I mean, in the sense that I don't know if there's a particularly Gandhian dimension to finding the culprits on the internet. But what I would say maybe is that we need to understand how this whole phenomenon of the internet, the World Wide Web, etc., how in a sense it was born with such a profound democratizing potential. I think to me that is what would fascinate Gandhiji the most. That and as we all know, Tim Berners-Lee gifted the World Wide Web to the world. It is the World Wide Web because he chose not to patent it. That's why it became what it is today. And Tim Berners-Lee himself, and by the way, he still runs the consortium, which gives us on a daily basis, updates the protocols that are making it possible for us to meet like this. And he has repeatedly lamented how the internet is being cannibalized by its own children, namely the big companies that have been born as a consequence, and how the potential for the internet to be a true commons. And in a commons, yes, there will be abusers. There will be people who will prey on other people, as has happened from time immemorial. But if it had remained a commons in which there was not such a terrible distortion of both money power and influence power, because now you are a single individual, and at the other end is incalculable volume of manipulative power. If that had not happened, and in fact, let me jump ahead to the point that maybe will help your question, the person who has asked the question. You have to cultivate communities which will help you to bring the rogue elements into control. And many people are attempting to do this. I'm told that one of the most path-breaking such efforts is called Holochain. All one word, Holochain. Have a look. They are making a concerted effort to create a more human internet in which it is human to err, but it is equally human to cultivate communities which will be able to, in some humane manner, rein in the rogue elements. I'm not sure if that's a proper answer, but that's all I can suggest.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I think hopefully answers the question. Moving on to the next question from Monsieur Gautier. This is on racism, sir. It says that you said Gandhi was also a victim of racism. How much of that experience of being a victim do you think influenced his fight against social discrimination in India?
I've been faithful to the Mahatma Gandhi that many Indians, whether they belong to different political parties, whether it is the Congress or the BJP, everyone honors the Mahatma Gandhi in India. So India has really been faithful to the Mahatma Gandhi. People who say that India has betrayed the Mahatma Gandhi's ideals, are totally wrong. India has tried to remain faithful to Mahatma Gandhi. So, some of his ideas are difficult today to embody. For instance, Khadi. We know that the world is moving towards industrialization more and more, so India needs to compete. His idea also about natural birth control by abstinence is difficult to practice today. Absolute non-violence. India is a country which is threatened. We know that it's threatened today by China, but there are many also enemies of India. So India needs to be strong, and violence is one of the means that is necessary to promote non-violence. But on the whole, I would say that the example of Mahatma Gandhi has been followed in India, and that today remains an icon not only in India but all over the world, even though some of his ideals are not very practical today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. The next question is to Mr. Menon. So the question is, even though Gandhi advocated for charkha and khadi, khadi is in a way can be understood as one of the many symbols of indigenization. In that sense, could you share your thoughts on changing definition or expansion in scope of the concept of khadi as a symbol of Indianness?
Khadi is more of a philosophy of what Gandhi preached in terms of self-reliance. And today, globally, fashion happens to be the second largest polluting industry in the world, next to oil. The world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed, is what Mahatma Gandhi said. Exactly, if you look at it, in today's time, the world produces about 150 billion garments every year, out of which only 50 billion garments are sold directly, and another 50 billion end. Process of industrialization of textile making has to slow down in some processes, and India can play a great role by following the Gandhian principle of empowering the rural artisans. Which the Khadi ideology and philosophy, in its process of making everything by hand, is carbon neutral. It saves the environment, it protects the ecology, it can protect the economy, and in the circular process of making a simple textile from cotton to, say, Mr. Narendra Modi's saying of saying farm to fiber to fashion, fashion to factory to foreign. The entire supply chain can be empowered and people could get employed. Simple fact. Something which is made by hand today alloys, even if a simple handloom or a textile which is produced by hand, ends up employing multitude of hands in the process of making it. That itself is an empowerment with the Gandhian vision of how self-reliant it can be. And in the growing times, when you look at pandemic, people are increasingly losing jobs, or there has been a huge amount of reverse migration. I think the village economy can be tightened by providing, or the world of fashion can provide these amazingly talented hand-skilled Indian artisans, the work in their back end in their villages. Technology is there to aid it today, that you don't need to bring them or migrate these people back into big cities. Can be decongested again within a larger thinking of the Gandhian principle. And the village economies, which 65% of India, as I said, is in villages, and that can make a huge role in changing world. But as you look at it, also the Gandhian principle of looking at something, the last 6 years, as I said, there's a huge increase in the sales of khadi that has happened due to consistent promotion by the current government. We also need to impact lives at the grassroots. The artisan who makes it needs to make a sustainable living out of practicing his craft, which has not been happening for the past many decades. That is where I think khadi can come and play a big role. And it has a global marketplace in the world of fashion, which is anything which is hand touched and made by hand can be the ultimate form of luxury. There is nothing which can, no machines can ever replace that hand skill and that handset of India. Today's time, we need to look at preserving these amazing philosophies of Gandhian ideals, which is still practiced in the villages of India.
Thank you, Mr. Menon. The last question is for Madame Latranche. We might take in one or two more questions, but for now, since they're coming in, this is with more firepower and increased violence across the world. Might is right seems to be more tenacious than non-violence. How could Gandhi's ideals provide practical solutions to such international aggression?
Question, and I was when I was talking earlier about the question between violence and non-violence, I think that's where it was aiming at. I think that there are two things that are important: is not the non-disarmament and non-nuclear weapon. I think it's a movement. We should the leaders of the world should really work to achieve that goal. That's one solution I think that will help in the world today. And there are also many non-violent movements today. Like for example, in France, there is the Mouvement d'Alternative Non-Violente, the MAN, and many other movements now. Some groups which are trying to follow the methods of Gandhiji by following civil disobedience, boycott. And I think these techniques, if they are used intelligently and if they have a good leadership, not just like some movements that we see today, which have no leadership and just use violence, but fight injustice, but in an intelligent way. That means, for example, you can boycott the goods, like Gandhiji said, have major strikes, but in a non-violent way. And I think these are the tools that Gandhiji gave, because he said that ahimsa, non-violence, is not the weapon of the weak, but of the brave. And Gandhi himself was the bravest of all. So I think the idea is that non-violence is not a weak tool. It's a tool that can be used to fight against injustice.
Thank you, Madam. We have one question which I will pose to the ambassador first, but other speakers, please, may also add to it. The question that we've received, sir, is the Swadesi model opposite to the current economic model where economies are judged with the GDP growth rate rather than the real growth of the 70% population of villages? Are we ready for a new system?
I think in the there's no such thing as a universal economic theory or an economic philosophy. If you notice, it changes every 2-3 decades. What is the economic orthodoxy of the time is a result of experiences that we go through. And I think that in the post-pandemic world, we are about to experience another of those moments, both because of the long-term structural changes that have been taking place, particularly as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, and now because of the immediate pandemic. A lot of rethinking will take place. I mean, I'm not sure whether we are going to be able to jettison completely the economic orthodoxies of the present, and it may not even be practical. But I think focus on some of the more humane aspects of the economy, that is moving away from simply talking about efficiency as we understand it, to also about equity, about resilience, about livelihoods. These are issues that are bound to come up in economic debates now and economic policy making. And I hope that we take lessons from it. I mean, as it is, you can already see some change, for example, in the way company stakeholders have become careful about the way companies have an impact on environment. For example, now this environment, social and governance, ESG financing is actually taking some concrete things. I think in our government alone, I mean, we've just heard Mr. Menon speak about the emphasis that we are now placing on local, which is not just about closing our doors, but trying to re-emphasize our own economic heritage. And part of this has been this great emphasis on khadi, for example, which is necessary to revitalize our villages and our village economies where most of the people live, and take the pressure also of some of the most negative consequences of the kind of economic development we've had on the cities, on our urban landscapes, on in general, in the brutalization of life that we have been witnessing. So I think we can expect some rethinking that will take place, forced both by the experiences that we've had over the past decade, but also because of the grassroots movement that is taking place, again, symbolized by people over here. Again, it goes back to that very fundamental question that everyone has raised, that instead of simply looking at it in segregated manner in specific areas of application, if we can imbibe the fundamental essence of Mahatma Gandhi's message, then it will apply to everything in all aspects. I mean, for example, even in the question of harmony, we speak of tolerance, which is, I think, a negative word. But if we imbibe his inner yoga, then we will be speaking more about acceptance, embracing each other, and about understanding and respect for each other. Because tolerance seems like something which you are just holding back, some sort of a prejudice. I think it is really about a complete relook at life, and economics is really just a part of society, just a part of our overall existence. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would any other speaker like to contribute to that? Yes, one second.
Yes, the ambassador is absolutely right. Though we are living in difficult times with the COVID-19, it's a time of survival. Traveling from Delhi to Paris, I see the same anguish in people, the same economic problems. So people are suffering from the COVID-19 economically. The tensions between China and India are very relevant today because the Chinese is the economic superpower in the world. So now, if one wants to apply Gandhian principles to competing with the Chinese economy, I don't think it's going to work. India needs a strong economy to become the superpower that it deserves to be. India is the economic alternative to China. The West is more and more discovering that, because with the COVID-19, there's an awareness in the West of how much dependence they had economically on China, and they want to relocalize their industry. So India is the natural alternative. And for that, India needs to go by the rules of economy that are going on at the moment. That is competition, that is opening up, that is liberalization. So for me, a lover of India, a defender of the values of Mahatma Gandhi, at the moment, India needs to strive to become that economic alternative to China the world is looking for.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am, just one second. Bakshi?
May I?
Yes, please.
I wanted to build on what the ambassador said, just 30 seconds, that today Swadeshi means not the opposite of globalization, but a globalization that is environmentally regenerative and adds to the last person's sense of agency. And one way to do this is to abolish the GDP as a measure, because the GDP tells you absolutely nothing about actual well-being. And finally, a small disagreement that if we are going to work with Gandhian values, then we also need to abandon the idea of any nation being a superpower. It's completely antithetical.
You need to unmute yourself.
We can't hear you.
Hello?
You need to unmute yourself. Yeah, now you're okay.
Yes. Madam Swash, you wanted to add to that?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to say that about India, that I think that Gandhiji gave us, as I was saying, Gandhiji's message based on the ancient values of India. And I do feel that India has a very important role in the world, and especially against China. And I think that I have faith that as India has shown us in the past, that India is going to be able to make that balance, I hope, between modernity and the ancient values. And I think that India has never been an aggressor, has always been a victim of oppression, of colonialism. And I think that today there was a book called India, a Reluctant Power, a Reluctant Superpower. And I think that India is going to become a superpower, but I think that India will maintain its ancient values. And that means that eventually it will give to the world that soft power, which it's already given in the world. So I have faith that if we will be able to follow the message of Gandhi and, of course, adapt it to the modern world.
Mr. Menon, would you want to add? Yes. Sorry, I think we've missed this twice. Please.
Gandhiji propounded the philosophy of Sarvodaya, which in Sanskrit means universal love or progress for all. So far more relevant now when we speak about the Sarvodaya in terms of recent approach towards sustainability, emphasizing on betterment of human life and ensuring fulfillment of basic needs of all human beings. It's very, very simple of thinking, and that has, I think, far more relevance when we speak about it, that the good of the individual is contained in the good of all. And that's some message that I think we would want to continue and take forward to see the world.
Thank you. Thank you, all the speakers. I think we will come to a close to this webinar. As we come to a close, the discussion of the past hour has reinforced the fact that Gandhiji's ideals resonate even today. We have discussed varied topics such as equality, global citizenship, and sustainable development, all while drawing on the powerful ideas of the man. With this, I would like to thank our panelists for this very engaging session on Mahatma Gandhi, and also would like to thank our very active and participative audience around the world. In the end, I would like to quote Gandhiji. He said, "In a gentle way, you can shake the world." We hope his ideals continue to shape, reshape, and when necessary, shake the world for the good of humanity. Thank you. Au revoir. Namaskar.